very kind of you to take time out, especially when you're sick. You didn't cancel.
Can't cancel Natalie Gray.
How un-Hollywood are you that you didn't cancel even when you're sick?
Can't cancel Natalie Gray.
Well,
you can't cancel people with charisma.
Well, it's very kind.
The people who have the charisma of a snow tire are those people you can cancel, and hopefully you can get away with it. They'll forgive you and then they'll bring you back.
I made the cut.
You made the cut.
Canceled. Well, most people in Hollywood will know who you are already.
Somehow I doubt it, but go on.
They're all like me. They all know who you are. They know your whole backstory. But for those who don't, let's just trace a little bit back. You started out in Boston, and you were actually running a comedy club. Is this correct? Was it your own comedy club?
Do you want the full story?
You could, whatever version you want.
I'll give you the non-Reader's Digest story, which is a reference from probably 70 years ago. But my dad passed away when I was 4, and as I grew up, I started sort of exploring in the basement. And when I was a young teenager, I found an old rusty file cabinet, one of the kinds that's, the ones that stood up just had 5 drawers, and it was locked and rusty, and I pried the drawers open, and every drawer I pried open was empty. Finally got to the bottom drawer, I pried it open, and there were about 50 albums in there, and they were all musty and old, and every single album except 3 were black artists. So it was like, Dinah Washington, Shirley Bassey, Goldfinger, Nat King Cole, Louis Armstrong, Diana Ross. And the 3 white albums that were in there were Jonathan Winter's Comedy and Tragedy, the Smothers Brothers, I think it was Crabs Walk Sideways and Lobsters Walk Straight. And then there was that album right there on the wall there, the button-down mind of Bob Newhart. But the record player that we had, the console record player in the basement, was all waterlogged and damaged and wasn't working. And so I had to get another one. But I didn't have any money. And back then, there was a thing that happened in a supermarket. For every $1 that you spent in a supermarket, they would give you a green stamp. They were called S&H green stamps. And you got enough of these stamps, and they would give you booklets, and you would paste them, and they literally licked them. They tasted like sperm. Not that I know what sperm tastes like.
Very dangerous.
Today,
what you just said.
And you'd paste them in, and for a certain number of books, you'd go to a redemption center, and you'd be able to get things. And I forget what it cost, how many books it was, but I must have saved up about 50 books, and I went in. And I got one of those record players that was like a fold-down record player. You could carry it, but it folded down the 2 speakers on each side. And I started playing the music albums first, and it was nice, but I just really wasn't, I don't know, it didn't move me as much. And then I started playing Jonathan Winters, and it was a little too crazy. And the Smothers Brothers was wonderful, but it was sort of musical comedy, more entertaining. But I was riveted by Bob Newhart. And even at a young age, I was riveted because it was like, if anyone is not familiar with how Bob Newhart does comedy, and continues to do comedy this day, he paints a picture, and he does the dialogue of himself and the other person. So he creates a whole, it's like literally, how Vin Scully calls a baseball game, except he's calling the action either way. And so it's sort of the only thing that anybody out there that would, probably the closest thing, if you could ever go on YouTube and look up Ellen DeGeneres Conversations with God.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So it's very similar to that. And so I would listen to it, and it was wonderful. Now, keep in mind, by today's standards, you probably would think he was bombing. I mean, it was like the response. If if you went and did like a showcase for the Letterman show and you got the kind of response that Bob Newhart got, you would think you died and there's no way that you're going to get on the Letterman show. It's not that he wasn't getting laughs. He was getting solid laughs, but it was a lower level of laughs, sort of a jacket and tie, nightclubby, conservative kind of titters. I don't think there was very few applause breaks, except at the end. And a little known fact about Bob Newhart before I go on. When he got the call from Warner Brothers Records in 1959, which they asked him to do a comedy album, and they said, listen, we're going to have you tape our first comedy album, and we want you to do it. And he said, listen, I've never done stand-up comedy before. I don't do stand-up comedy. I'm like a sketch guy. I do like things on television. And they said, we don't care. Just find a club and just do it. So he went and he recorded it, and it turned out that was Warner Brothers Records' first gold record in their history.
Wow. Good grief.
And then later on in his life, believe it or not, Buddy Hackett introduced him to his wife, who he's still with today. So
I met Bob Newhart in an elevator at HBO, and he seemed absolutely delightful.
It's so fun. I mean, I'll go on with the story, but I want to tell you a quick story about Bob. So this guy is like, started me in comedy, basically, and I get to do a benefit for Buddy Hackett and his wife and a cause for animals. And it's an amazing lineup of comedians from, Dom DeLuise to Harvey Korman to Buddy to, I think it was Buddy, maybe he'd passed away, and Bob Newhart was giving the Lifetime Achievement Award to Phyllis Diller. And I had Jay Moore on it, and Dane Cook, and a bunch of other people, Louis Anderson. And Sherry Hackett comes up to me and she says, Barry, Mr. Newhart would like to speak with you. I never sat with him. I sit down, hey Bob, I'm producing the show tonight. He said, oh, you can call me. I said, I'm sorry. I said, hi, Mr. Newhart, I'm producing the show tonight. And he said, please call me Bob. I said, okay, Bob, how can I help you? He said, listen, I got to get out of here. I'm like, what do you mean you got to get out of here? He's like, my wife is at home. I got to get out of here. I said, Bob, you just got here. The show hasn't started yet, and the big moment is you bring up Phyllis. That's the big close to the show. Not gonna happen. I can't wait that long. I gotta get out of here. You gotta get me out of here by 9:30. I said, Bob, it's like 9:15. We're about to start the show. I can't. That's the whole big thing. I'm gonna leave if I can't get on by 9:30. I said, Bob, please. He said, Mr. Newhart. I said, okay, Mr. Newhart.
Oh.
Please, we can't do that. I said, I'm sorry, Barry. That's my final decision.
Oh, my goodness.
So I remember walking into another room. It's like one of the first events where I'm with these legends, and I'm in the other room, like literally getting ready to buy a handgun, wondering what I should do. And I decided that rather than, I knew I could get him to stay, and I knew I could get him to close it. And I knew that would be best for the show. But I just couldn't do it to him. I had to do what he wanted. And so I had the other comics going on after that, which was impossible. And it sort of hurt the whole show, but the comics did their best after it.
So he left? He did leave?
No, he did the Lifetime Achievement Award literally 1/3 through the show. And then the other comics had to.
Ow.
So anyway, but going back, so I start playing this Bob Newhart album. I start memorizing a routine that strikes me more than any other, which was the driving instructor, which is a very famous routine. It's about 7 or 8 minutes long. I can even remember the beginning of it right now. Let's see if this will be weird.
Drum roll, please.
I remember it because I memorized it and performed it for my high school talent contest. And so how Bob would do this bit, he'd be like, okay, everybody, there's a group of people who go to work every day and they don't know if they're going to come home at night. And I'm talking about America's driving instructors. So picture a car, I'm the driving instructor, and seated next to me is a woman driver. Now, back then, women drivers were considered like maybe Chinese drivers today, if there's such a stereotype now, who knows, whatever. And then he just went into it, and he'd be like, okay, all right, Mrs. Webb, how are you? Just let me familiarize myself with your case. It says here your teacher, your instructor was Mr. Adams, is that correct? Yes. Um, how fast were you going when Mr. Adams jumped from the car?
Oh.
75. And where was that, Mrs. Webb? In your driveway. And that's how he would deliver it. And those were the kind of laughs that he would get, like from like maybe 100 people.
Right.
And so I did it at the talent show, went well. And then I got accepted to Boston University. And I decided, I was thinking about doing comedy, but I wasn't sure, because when I was 15, I started working in camps for disabled kids and adults, and I became like I don't know what you call it, sort of how you were in Canada when you were a young girl. I was like a phenom when it came to working with the disabled. As a teenager, I would do outward bound stuff. I would do like all sorts of risky, unique things.
Wow.
When I was like 18, I was like running like 3 lakes, 2 pools, program. You know, it was just and I would always be groundbreaking in that area, even though I had no degree or anything like that. And I was always recruited for. I worked in Bedford, New Hampshire, which is where Adam Sandler and Sarah Silverman grew up, and I spent 5 years there, and then I went to a camp in Bradford Woods, Indiana, and I worked there. But to make a long story short, I always wanted to think about comedy, but I never did. And then in 1978, there was a blizzard in Boston, and it paralyzed the city, and the whole city was shut down. So it was a federal emergency, so no cars were allowed on the streets. And the snowbanks were like, 15, 20 feet high. It was crazy. And I remember it was a Saturday night. I'm just walking through Kenmore Square, the Charles Gate area near where Emerson College is and where BU starts. And I heard laughter. It's like literally like midnight, 1 a.m. And I don't know. I just, are you okay over there? Okay. Oh, sorry. So I heard laughter, and I look up, and this is Brownstone Pub, and ironically, it's called Crossroads. And I walk up the stairs, and there's about 30 people watching a guy on stage who looks like a young Larry from the Three Stooges, and he's got his foot on a chair, another foot on the floor, and he's strumming a guitar. And he's singing, another thing I'll never forget, he's singing, "Rachel, my dear, wish you were here, oh how I miss her. Having sex with Rachel was amazing. It's like a concert. Beach balls would hit me in the head. Frisbees would be flying around the room. And every time she wanted more, she'd light a match." And then he kept saying, "Rachel, my dear, wish you were here." And then he said, "Thanks, good night." Got off, people were applauding, and he just walked out before I could say anything to him. I didn't know who he was. Later on, I found out that the first comedian that I ever saw in my entire life live on stage was Stephen Wright.
Oh, interesting.
So I go find out when the open mic is, and I decide I'm going to do the next open mic. So the swimming championships are that week. I shave my head for swimming. And I go to the open mic night, and I practice before that my Bob Newhart routine, the driving instructor. And so I go on, and I do it. This guy brings me on. He's like, they call him the taxi driver. He's like this huge blue collar guy. And it kills. It kills harder than on the album. I'm like, wow, this is incredible. This has exceeded all expectations. This is great. Because I'd done it at a talent show in high school, but you don't know how. They probably were more supportive of me, so this is the first time like in a club.
So how old were you at this point?
Probably 19 or
Okay.
20.
Would you have announced that it was a Bob Newhart bit?
I did. I went on and I said, hey, this is a Bob Newhart bit. It's so, you're very shrewd because of what I'm going to tell you. And I went on and I said, this is a Bob Newhart routine. This is what I'm going to do. And it's called the driving instructor. I kill. I get off stage. I walk down the stairs. This guy chases after me. He says, kid, where'd you come from? I said, oh, I'm just from BU. He said, let me tell you some advice, kid. You were amazing. So this is my advice to you. Listen, when you're doing somebody else's bid, just take the fucking bid. Don't announce that you're doing the bid. Just take the bid. I'm like, okay, all right. And so I learned right then and there that I should write my own material.
Right. Because that's horrible advice to take somebody's material.
Yeah.
It's horrible comedy advice.
And so I wrote my own material, my next 5 minutes. And then I signed up for now keep in mind, this experience was awful from the start because, I'm getting ready to go on. I'm nervous enough. And this host says, hey, this next guy is funny and he's gay. No, he's not really funny. Please welcome. Let me tell you one more thing. He's hung like a buffalo. Please welcome Barry Katz. And I was like flattered, but still it was like devastating. And I was like, oh my God. So then I go to an open mic night called the club was called the Ding Ho in Inman Square, Cambridge. It was a historic Chinese restaurant comedy club. And Lenny Clark from Rescue Me and so many shows hosted the open mic night. And back then, there weren't that many comics. So there was a great comic from Boston, then an open micer, then a great comic. I sign up. I go on, and I've got a shaved head from swimming. I go on.
But at least you're hung.
At least I'm hung. Well, listen, the truth comes out in the end. Or the beginning. So I go on, and again, it kills, but this time it's my original material.
Okay.
I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I just got off stage, and I thanked the doorman, and I walked out. All of a sudden, I hear somebody running after, like steps behind me, like a nerve. This is a bad area there. I turn around, it's Lenny Clark running after me. He's like, Katzy. I'm like, yeah, Lenny? He said, listen, where the fuck did you come from? Again. So
Wow.
I'm like, well, I'm from BU. This is when I first time. Listen, that was amazing. You got to come back here and open my show next week. I look at him and I say, listen, I don't think I can write 5 new minutes by next week. Again, not knowing anything about comedy. Right. And he pauses and he looks at me sort of like the dog kind of looks at you when he wants something. And then he looked at me hard and he said, you dumb Jew heed kike bastard. You stupid fucking kike. You come back here, you do the same material, and you're going to open my show. I said, okay, great.
And in your case, you've probably been called much worse.
Much worse, yes. So I go back there, and when I get there, I notice, it's the local bar. It looks like all the same people. I go on, I bomb so badly, like you can hear crickets. It was devastating. And I didn't want to go on for another 6 months. But then I just started going on. And then a guy named Chance Langton, who was a comic in Boston, He was a guitar comic. I'll never forget. He used to have this little riff. He used to sing. He says, what did he say? His songs for all the ladies. All I am saying is give chance a piece. You know, he was like a kind of a strange guy, but he was great. He gave me a chance, and he offered me the doorman position at his comedy club called Play It Again Sam's, which was a movie bar, entertainment bar, restaurant, and comedy was downstairs. This is before DVD, so it was the only place to play the movies that were coming off the theaters. And I did the door on the week Friday for $10 and Saturday for $10. And the caveat was I'd get to go on at 5 minutes of 2 a.m. after 4 headliners.
It sounds like me at the comedy store.
And I was the doorman, so it was really hard. But I loved it. And they ended up throwing him out of there, and I ended up taking over the club. And when I took over the club, I started creating shows for the young people that I thought were talented that couldn't get stage time. So Wednesday was Bob Goldthwait show. Thursday was Dennis Leary show.
Wow. Friday
was this guy DJ Hazard, and I believe Dana Gould also. Saturday was Lenny Clark. Sunday was Anthony Clark. And we had Paula Poundstone and Jonathan Katz, who created Dr. Katz, and just an amazing array of talent. And, you know, you'd get in arguments with people, too. Like, you know, I remember Janine Garofalo was bombing every week on Dennis's show, and I took Dennis aside, and I said, listen, you know, do you think maybe you want to give her a little break and put somebody else in? And the only time he ever yelled at me, he closed the door. He said, fuck you. She's funny. You know, no one else will give me any stage time in this town but you, but I will walk away from this fucking club if I don't get her on the stage every single time I'm here. I said, okay, man, if it's your show, and if you believe in her that strongly, then that's...
Do you think, were they dating or anything, or was he just that committed to her comedy?
No, I don't think they were dating. I think he was committed.
That's pretty worthy thing to do, and pretty decent thing.
Yeah, so those were my roots, and then I started booking one-nighters, comedy clubs, and all over New England, and before I knew it, I had like 50 comedy rooms in New England. It was crazy, and a lot of them were hell gigs. I actually, you know, the first, just some of the gigs were like, you know, Frank's in Franklin, and the guy's name, the owner was Frank, you know, or just these shitty gigs. Some were great, but some were shitty, but it was a good training ground for a lot of people. And that's where I met my first clients I ever had, which were, if I can remember, Anthony Clark, who I still work with, Louis C.K. I represented him for about 7 years when he was 17 to 24. Jay Moore I met in Boston doing some rooms there, and then in New York, who I still work with, Nick DiPaolo, who I've worked with on and off throughout the past. So there's a lot of people I met in that area. And it was just an amazing time. And then Eddie Brill, who was a friend of mine who was booking Letterman for a long time, had gone to New York and was running this comedy room called the Paper Moon in Greenwich Village, next to the famous Italian restaurant Il Molino and the Firehouse on West 3rd Street. And he told me he was leaving, and I was free to come down and talk to the owners to try to open a club there. I got down, I literally drove down to New York for the first time, stopped at a bar, got on a payphone, called real estate agents out of the Yellow Pages, looked at 3 apartments, picked the first one on 82nd and Central Park, and said, fuck it, I'm doing this. I'm making this move. Before I even knew about the club, I meet with the owners. They say, I don't know how to tell you this, but Rick Messina is booking this club now. Now, Rick Messina, for those of you who don't know, back then he was doing what I was doing with a guy named Tony Camacho in New York. This is before he was manager. But then I got the call 6 weeks later that he didn't want it anymore. I could just take it over. And so I took it over and turned it into the Boston Comedy Club, believe it or not, which was a horrible name for a club in New York.
That's right.
And
I think this is the first time I even knew it was in New York.
Yeah.
Obviously, I always thought it was in Boston.
Yeah, and so the first comic on stage there was Louis. He hosted the weekend. So, and it was a great spot. It was there for 17 years, and it was a place where I met some of the most unbelievable comedians and started working with everybody from, Dave Chappelle, I met there on an open mic night. Just crazy stories and things.
Are you guys still friends?
Yeah, I actually just sat down with him at the Real Food Daily about maybe 6 months ago with him and his wife and one of their kids. It was an amazing, we're sort of diverting here, but it was an amazing thing because, everybody has a different perception of what happens when you sit down or you talk with somebody, unless it's videotaped. But, Dave I worked with for 8 years, and I think he's just, he's just a genius. He was always a genius. Just, the red light went on, it was magic, and I loved my time working with him, and I just loved it. And so I sit down, and he says, "Do you know what this frame of time is here?" I said, "Well, it's whatever month it was." He said, "No, it's 20 years ago this month that you met me for the first time."
Aww.
That's what I said. I said, "Oh, you remember that?" He said, "Yeah, I remember it. Do you remember what you said to me?" And I said, "I met you before you went on. The manager, Jason Steinberg, had told me about you." And I shook your hand and I said, "You're going to be one of the biggest stars in comedy and film, and you're going to change the face of the world of comedy." And you asked me, how did I know that? And I said, well, when I shake people's hands, sometimes I feel like the movie The Dead Zone, and I can see the future. And that was the future I saw. And when somebody slaps a table in a restaurant when there's silverware and plates on it, and they slap it so hard that, the silverware shakes, and people are like, what the fuck just happened there? And he's just like, and he leans over, and then it's the animated Dave. That's right. That's right. And it haunts me every single time I think about it. And I'm like, well, Dave, I just, sitting down here. I don't want to get you upset or anything. And then he got into the solemn Dave, and he's like, I'm sorry, man. It's just every time I think about that moment, I say to myself over and over again, how the fuck did he know? How did he know? And I said, I don't know what it is. It's just
yeah, well, that's your knack.
It's just a thing.
You see into the future with these comedic talents. You see into the future of these people that are going to break and become giant stars. You've got a knack.
There's a lot of other people who see things, but I think that
nobody's got your batting average. You've got a string of very, very successful people that you took a chance on.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like, look, even Phil Jackson loses championships. And so sometimes, like, I realize that I'm, you want to be the right person, but sometimes you realize you're not the right person. Sometimes you're doing something and the person is so self-destructive and gets in their own way, and you're fighting an entity that's them.
Like a Cat Williams.
Like Cat Williams again, a guy who's just, I would love to work with Cat Williams. It would be one of the greatest honors of my life to try to figure out a way to stabilize the playing field, to figure out a way to get him on the right track. Because talent-wise, he's on the right track.
Right.
There's nothing regarding his talent that he needs me for. He's a great actor, great dramatic actor, great comedic actor. Comedically, he's brilliant. You know, for me, as a manager, sometimes your work is not with the artist craft, it's with the artist, you know, emotional toolbox
Right. The
that they're
artist.
working for. And so, and those are some of the things you deal with all the time, because so many artists, they get in their own way. And it's truly amazing. It's just amazing how many hours of the day and week and month and year, if you could add up all the hours. I mean, if there's any artist listening to this today, I think the biggest thing they could take from this is the fact that just take an inventory of even all the moments that were even, you know, borderline, that you maybe had some anxiety about an audition, or you were going on a show and you were like, oh my God, I gotta follow that fucking guy, or God, that guy stole material, that guy's a hack, or, you know, typing a anonymous Facebook post to do something, or, you know, if you could add up all the minutes and hours that you spend doing things that have no chance of helping you, and think about what you could do with that amount of time.
Right.
It's amazing. You know, it's like I work with Jay Moore, and if he were sitting here, you know, he'd be the first one to tell you there's been many times in his life where he's spent minutes and hours thinking about things or doing things that would have no bearing on his success. And then you look at, like, for him, starting a podcast, just finally starting a podcast, and going from 0 to 13 million people in a year and, what is it, a year and 4 months, or a year and a half.
Good grief.
So now I'll talk to him and I'll be like, hey, how you doing? And he'll be like, good, I'm in traffic. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm in traffic going to Burbank. I said, you're going to Burbank at this hour? Yeah, I got to get a podcast with Leno.
Wow.
I said, how long have you been in the car? He's like, 3 hours. And it'll probably be 2 hours on the way back. And then the podcast will probably be an hour, hour and a half. And as I hung up the phone, I realized that now here's somebody taking those hours that were spent thinking about things or not doing, and doing them, and moving the rock up the hill.
Yeah.
And I think that's what most artists, for some reason, they just don't get, or they don't figure it out. And look, you know, huggable and lovable normally wins the race, unless the content is extraordinary. And even then, sometimes you can't win like you want to win. Like, you know, you look at something like Arrested Development, for instance. You know, there isn't anybody anywhere that doesn't think it's a great show, loves it, but there's no one who's huggable and lovable really in the show. It's the anti-huggable and lovable show. And mainstream America, sadly, they want love. They want their Mary Tyler Moore. They want their, but not only that, they want their Raymond. They want their Kramer. They want their, you know, look at Modern Family. Well, it's, you know, there's no secret why it's a huge success. Well, obviously it's got Steve Levitan, who's an amazing man and showrunner, creator. But look at all the characters. I mean, they're like, every one of them just, it's like an explosion of joy. Um, and that's what, if you're an artist, that's what you're a writer or a comedian or anybody, actor, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to figure out, like, I mean, I know this is the lowest common denominator, and I'm sorry to, but I think it's important, even though it is lowest common denominator humor. And something about Mary, there's the scene where
The hair gel?
yeah, so there's the scene where his friend tells him he has to masturbate before the date.
Right.
So there's the scene where he's in the bathroom trying to make it happen. That alone in a television show and a movie would be enough for it to be something that's talked about for a long time. But no, there's the next thing where it actually happens, but he can't find it. So now he's looking around, and again, no words.
Right.
So that moment, that second moment, again, as big a moment for any television show to be talked about for weeks. So that's the second one. Third one.
Right.
She's at the door. Can't find it, goes to the door. Opens the door. I think the most is high. The camera's on her. Comes around to him, and his head is turned this way. So even the audience doesn't know what's happening. Then slowly, Ben goes like this, and it's there.
Right.
Number 3.
This is the second sperm reference to this interview.
I know. I'm being lowest common denominator. I'm sorry. So 3. And then she goes like that. Takes it. Boom. Well, that alone, going like that, I believe after she takes it, that's probably the 4th one. The 5th one is probably like this. And then we cut to the restaurant. We cut on Ben. How was your day today? And then we go to her, and like this. So 6 holy shit moments in a row with very little dialogue at all or anything. Again, I know it's lowest common denominator, but is there any doubt why the movie was made $1 bazillion? Even movies that you aren't sure of, or you're not like saying, I don't think Will Ferrell would be putting Talladega Nights in his, in his time capsule of his proudest, the film he's the most proud of. But I mean, the moment where he stabs himself in the leg when he's in the wheelchair, I mean, is there anyone in the theater that isn't laughing?
It's like, I remember Dumb and Dumber with the shitting scene where you just hear him in the toilet.
Yeah.
And
so, and the key is that if you can create those moments and then create them without the lowest common denominator. Like there was a movie I saw, and it was more of a low-key movie. It didn't get a lot of play, but you're probably wondering why I would see the movie, but like there's very few actors or comedians that are so real that it's not even like Jason Segel is like a guy who, I mean, obviously he isn't a guy who's people are rallying around to make $100 million movies, but they are rallying around him because his comedy is always real. It's always a little bit dark, and so I remember the scene, and I think it was 5-year engagement or something. He's gone off the deep end. She goes to visit him. He's living in the woods in a cabin. Every single thing in the cabin is made of an animal. So he's drinking from like a hoof cup. There's like a candelabra with a deer, thing. The chairs have the fur around. Every single thing is like. And I just couldn't. I mean, it was so dark, but I was just laughing so hard because it was just so original and such an amazing moment. Again, the fish out of water. This girl coming in, beautiful girl coming in, and she's. But in anything, that's it. It's just it's just all about the content, and again, you can get away with not having the greatest content if you're an artist. You can't get away with it if you run a technology company or an automobile company. If you're, if you put out an iPad that's not as good as the whatever, or a tablet's not as good as the iPad, then your chances are you're not going to be in the market too long.
Right.
But as an artist, you can do things sometimes that you just the right timing. Like if, for instance, like if you if you were to do a podcast with like the woman who wrote Twilight, and you were to sit across from her and say, "Could you tell me, like, how does your novel compare to some of the greatest novels of your generation?"
Right.
She'd probably laugh, because she knows that she didn't write a masterpiece.
Right.
But the timing was right, and vampires have been around for a long time, and whatever, and for some reason things came together, and it was the right time.
Right.
And boom. That doesn't mean that she's a bad person. That doesn't mean she's a bad artist. I'm not saying she's a bad writer. I'm just not saying that she's probably not like the most extraordinary person. It's like if Dane Cook were sitting across from Chris Rock, he would say that Chris Rock is a far superior comedian than himself.
Would he?
Yes, he would. But the thing is, Dane came along at an interesting time when social networking was coming up, and he saw the vision, and I was fortunate enough to be there to help him
Capitalize.
Initiate the vision of the social networking. And so he started figuring it out, and then he could press a button and sell out an arena without a promoter, without anything.
Like Rob Delaney now doing the same thing through Twitter.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that, and that doesn't mean that Dane was a far superior comic to like the people who never did arenas. It just means that he was, he tapped into something. When he got on that stage, he was able to deliver. Like for Rob Delaney, you gotta, when he gets that opportunity, you have to deliver.
Right.
You have to deliver. People need to want to come back.
Right.
And if you don't deliver, they're not coming back.
Right.
And that's why you notice that a lot of people, Dice did arenas for 12 years. Dane did them for, I think, 6 or 7. I don't think he's done comedy for 2 years, but on any paid stage. But you just have to go and give them a show.
Right.
And so when Rob Delaney gets out there, that's going to be the biggest challenge.
I think he is out there a bit now. He just did a bunch of shows in London.
Yeah, so
I think he actually broke some kind of a record of most sold out shows.
It's fantastic.
From a comedian from another country. It was some little detail.
And that's fantastic. And if the reviews are in and the people loved it, then that's what you need to do. You have to create those moments that blow people. Because if you don't, it's like anything else. You just don't have a chance to do, when you're auditioning as a comic, you're going up against people who do, are literally waiting tables because that's all they do is act. They can't make any money any way else. Comedians can make their money doing things.
Right.
So they don't have to book that gig. But if this person doesn't book the gig, they're back in line at, Spruzo on the Pacific Coast Highway serving Chinese chicken salad to some...
Well, I wanted to ask you a couple of things, and I just want to tell Jason something, to not get cutaways now, because I'll need that coverage for when this, so do the cutaways afterwards, because that's really important for this. We'll just stay on either Barry or the 2-shot, because when these flip-flop, that's when we'll go to that. So you can do the cutaways after.
Just tell me what time it is right now.
Okay, so the time right now is 3:21.
Wow, okay.
You're really like a powered interviewee. I can just sit here and you can you interview yourself.
It's not like Oprah. Did you dope? Yes.
Right,
That's
right.
No. Did you?
So, I mean, you brought up social media because obviously Dane probably tapped into it more than anybody, and more power to him. It's so prevalent now. I mean, how has the comedy scene changed, do you think, for social media? Do you think a comedian has to have a presence on the internet to make it these days?
I think great performances, no matter what you do, are going to determine everything. And so, great content, great performances that are undeniable. I mean, look, Aerosmith was passing flyers around Harvard Square to see their shows. That's how they did it. Now there's social networking, so it's like, it still doesn't make any difference unless your content stands out. I don't care, how many comics are on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. If your comedy doesn't move people and blow people the fuck away, social networking isn't going to help you. I mean, Bo Burnham was singing songs on his bed into a camera, in his bedroom. Every time I think about that, I think of Gary Gulman's line where he says, "I'm living at home, I'm 26 years old. Let me tell you something. If you're waking up under Star Wars sheets, the Force is not with you." But Bo was living at home. He was a teenager or whatever, so he was just a teenager, though. And he put his videos on YouTube. Well, there's, 200,000 other motherfuckers playing guitar on their bed on YouTube. He's not, he didn't go on the Tonight Show and say, "Hi, my name is Bo Burnham, and check out my videos on YouTube." Nothing. There's no promotion. There's no ads. It's 0-0. All it is the public speaks. We love this. Let me send it to somebody. I love this. Let me send it to somebody.
I think it can be a fast route for comedians, though.
It can be a fast route if the content is brilliant and if the person is undeniable. Tell me anybody who really, really does well, that there isn't some part of their persona or their act that's undeniable.
Oh, I'm sure. I absolutely think the talent has to be there. I've seen, for example, Angela Johnson, very talented young comedian, and definitely kind of skyrocketed with the viral video about the nails. And I mean, I'd say that was a YouTube comedian's success story.
Yeah, whereas 50 years ago, Buddy Hackett had to play one crowd at a time to do the Chinese waiter routine. And, that's it. It's like you have to, and I'm not saying that Angela Johnson is doing Buddy Hackett's routine. All I'm saying is like, there's a lot of things that there's very few things that are new in comedy. So you learn from the masters and you take what's with you, and
I just do Bob Newhart's routine.
There you go. And so that video, people loved it, and women loved it because they go to nail salons and they see her, they related to it, and she was killing. And she was not offensive. She was not a threat to them. She was beautiful, but she wasn't like somebody who was like, "That bitch, I'm not going to laugh at her." She had a very disarming way about her. Women loved her. As they say, women wanted to be like her, men wanted to sleep with her. And she went and did the shows, and she figured out a way to kill in the shows when she probably wasn't ready. But she did it. She rose to the occasion, and that's what happens. And that's why, it's like, sports is an amazing metaphor for anything. It's like, how did Timothy Bradley beat Manny Pacquiao with a broken ankle? Well, it fucking happened. I mean, how did Peyton Manning lose at home, too? I mean, how did Tom Brady lose the last 2 Super Bowls? He lost because there was somebody who figured out a way to work a little bit harder and make one little thing happen that changed the dynamic. Sometimes all it takes is one. Sometimes you win the game. I mean, using that as an example, those last 2 Super Bowls, he won the game. The game was won. He handed it over to his defensive team. Here you go. We've won the fucking game. All you got to do is just stop them from going 90 yards for a touchdown in 1 minute. But they couldn't do it, and he lost the game. But it's his loss because some guy figured out a way to do something that seemed impossible. And when you're an actor or a comedian and you're auditioning or you're doing anything, you're doing the social networking, you always have to believe that there's somebody out there who's going to take you down, who's going to take the steam away from you. When Cat Williams left the scene, opened the door for Kevin Hart. The door was open, and he never looked back. And that's what happens. You think that Kevin Hart would sit on this couch and say, you know, I did Soul Plane. Very proud of that movie. And that really launched my career. No, that was damaging. And that's how great and what a hard worker and how forceful and how strong his will was. He turned what probably could have been a negative into a positive, to where people now look at it as it's like a cult movie. He turned it around.
If you had, you know, you're a father, if one of your kids said, I want to be a comedian or even in entertainment, how would you feel about that?
Prop act or guitar act? Or just
Could
a regular
be. There
comic?
may be a guitar act, Barry. What if?
No, I'm kidding. You know, I would just try to let them know the pain that's involved in the journey, because what's unbelievable is when you look at most household name comedians and you really look at their body language and how they are, you notice a striking thing is that most all of them seem not as happy as they should be. They've gotten everything they want, but for some reason they just don't seem like they're happy. And you have to ask yourself why.
And why do you think it is?
Because most artists are broken. And they think that success in comedy is like the serum to fill the hole that they never resolved in their personal lives. So they think just moving forward and being creative is going to fill the hole, but then it's like heroin. It just, the high is there, then it goes away and the hole's still there. And the only way that they're going to get really truly happy is if they address the hole.
Right. Which may not be able to be patched up necessarily.
True.
How has the terrain changed for you? I mean, you've been at this a long time now in comedy.
I knew God. I went to high school with him.
You knew God. I mean, you do a couple of God's jokes, I believe. You know, you're still around. You're still successful. You're more successful than ever. You've got the swanky office, beautiful office. I mean, how is the terrain of comedy changed for you? You know, you're on the front lines, working for your clients, helping them achieve their dreams. What's different that wasn't around 10, 15 years ago?
I mean, management is still all about turning no's into yeses. So that never changes, no matter what the variables are, no matter what social networking is there. You know, these artists who are on the social networking, they're on there. You know, Mark Maron started a podcast because he kept hearing no's.
Right.
No, we don't want you for this gig. No, we don't want you to headline the improv. No, we don't want you to act in this sitcom. No, you're not right for this film. So he just said, fuck it, I'm going to do my own thing.
Right.
So that's what's changed, where you can take things into your own hands when people say no and try to prove them wrong through the world. And so I find that a lot of I'm able to do a lot of things for artists the traditional way, but then there's a lot of artists that can do things.
You mean sleeping around?
Sleeping around, that's right.
Pimp yourself out for your clients.
That would be so depressing for them.
So what do you mean in the traditional way? Just like hard calling people and telling people about your clients?
Like, for instance, let's say like the Tonight, like Letterman is still like, it's like one of the validation stamps of comedy. You don't get Letterman by, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you have 500 million people on the YouTube channel. If your content isn't great, you're not getting on.
Right.
If your 5 minutes isn't great, you're not getting on. So you still have to work the traditional magic on those shows. Now, granted, you're only reaching a couple of million people that night, as opposed to being able to reach God knows how many million. But it's always been a launching off pad if you can have an extraordinary set on one of those shows. It still can launch you. It still can launch you. It's and so that's interesting. People are always worried, oh, I got to have a half-hour special. I got to have an hour special. It doesn't matter if it's not great. You're not going to get. How many people who've done half-hour specials are household names? You could probably look. It's probably been 200 half-hour specials. What, 10%? It's the same thing. It's just if the content isn't there, you're not getting there. And sometimes people have great material and things, but then they'll have a couple of bits that are just, they'll have a great, original, unique, unbelievable take on something. You're like, wow, that is incredible. And then the next bit is like, hey, what part of the McNugget is the chicken come from? And you're like, what just happened there? You just had this brilliant bit, and now granted, even when you watch Chris Rock and you watch like his third special, whatever it is, he's rolling out with 10 minutes on Michael Jackson. And, probably the most jaded comic is saying, come on, Chris, what are you doing Michael Jackson jokes for? But, my answer to that is, what the fuck have you written today?
Right.
This guy has the get out of jail free card. He's already done so much. So if he wants to have fun doing some Michael Jackson jokes, that's his right, and they're funny, and I love them.
You use this word launch, Just, and you have really been involved in launching some people to pretty extraordinary heights. And I know one of the things with being a manager is clients come and go. I mean, I've seen it many times, and I feel you're a very positive person. Like, you just seem to be able to turn situations and be positive. When you have people that you've been very close and worked with, I mean, how do you handle it when the relationship shifts?
Well, I think it's, being a manager, you have to accept when you're being a manager is you ride the bull as long as you can. And some people are able to ride the bull for the whole ride. Some people get thrown off, like I said, even Phil Jackson loses championships.
Right.
A funny joke, just to let you know, I remember this comedian he calls himself Talent. And about 5 years ago, he's doing a joke about the Boston Celtics and the Lakers in the championship. In the final game, the Celtics are beating them by 40 points with 1 minute left. He said Phil Jackson calls a timeout. A minute left, down by 40 in Boston Garden. He calls a timeout. It's the final game. It's going to be over. What the fuck do you say to your team when you're Phil Jackson down by 40 with a minute left? I can just picture that huddle. He's like, come on, everybody take a knee. Okay. Where's the fucking exit? Find the exit. Let's get out of here. And so what I'm trying to say here is that is that when you're doing these things and you're trying so hard and you're working, the way I look at it is that I have to do great work. And so that's the number one thing, like the artist. If I do great work and a client fires me, at least I know, and they know, and the world knows that this guy did the job. I don't know what happened, why it happened, whatever, but I have to know my part in it.
Right.
And a lot of times it can have to do with, the fact is that as an artist, you don't really have that much control sometimes, and you want to wrestle back control. And sometimes you don't want to be face to face with the person that knew you when you were, when you weren't really doing anything. They want to know that they're moving to another chapter in their lives sometimes. It could be anything. Look, I've represented Jay Moore for 24 years. I'm still working with him, but I only work with Chappelle for 8, CK for 7, Dane Cook for 17, Caliendo for 10, Whitney for 7. So, and I'm sure the list goes on and on. So, I just am very zen about it. I'm not going to, I'm disappointed. I would like things to continue. I'd like to represent people when I'm in a wheelchair.
Right.
But I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and that's the way it is. And nobody, I don't think, and again, I don't really have an accurate picture of myself, but I don't think people walk around the business saying that Barry Katz, he's a shitty manager, or that Barry Katz, he doesn't know how to launch somebody's career, or that Barry Katz, he doesn't make shit happen. Now, granted, probably a lot of people would say a lot of polarizing, horrible things about me, about other things, but I think that's the thing that you have to take with you, and you hope that if you do get the shit kicked out of you, that you're able to come back with somebody else who believes in you and who cares about you, and God forbid if that ends, then there's something else that you're working on. Honestly, if I had my choice, I would prefer I never got paid, and there was no money that changed hands. Because in the end, that's one of the things that's the most difficult thing with artists is money.
Right.
And where it goes and how it goes and what you're doing and what you're paying out, and do I have to pay this person, and what did that agent do, and it's like,
is that usually like the deal breaker with clients? I mean, in general, is it usually financial things?
No, I just think that money, it's like when you get your car fixed and the person does an amazing job on your car. And you're like, oh, wow, this is fantastic. And you get the bill and you're like, motherfucker. God damn it.
Right.
Fucking
There's a sting.
Stings here.
Yeah.
But not all the time. But I'm just saying that I just think that for me, the deals that I've done that have been the most money have been the things where I've been the most unhappy. And I've done, I did a $50 million deal for a guy, and I was probably the most unhappy that I've ever been.
Why?
Because I knew that the person really wasn't comfortable with the gig. But with the landscape, the way things were, it was a realization that this was a shot at something that could help him and his family and
this wasn't Dave Chappelle.
No.
Okay. So someone else in the business has earned $50 million.
Oh yeah,
in comedy, somebody's been offered this.
ton of people have been. There's a lot of things that are crazy that you can't believe, but they're there, they're out there.
So in that situation, though, the client, you knew it was a gig they didn't really want, but they took it for the money.
You have to create opportunities for the artists, and if they say no, they say no, and if they say yes, they say yes. But
did they take it in the end?
Yes, they did.
You'd think they'd be happy then, and then you could be happy. I mean, that's a crazy amount of money. Who could not be happy with that except Dave Chappelle? Only Dave Chappelle's allowed to not be happy with $50
No,
million.
because you want things to go well. When sometimes the oddest thing about the Chappelle thing with the $50 million, and the thing that we don't take with us, that's really amazing when you really think about it. He made a decision not based on money. He made a decision based on his creative integrity. And the money didn't define him. He wasn't worried about whether he was ever going to make that money again in his lifetime. He just wanted to be able to look in the mirror. And I'm embarrassed to say that I'm not that good a man. If I were in that situation, I would probably figure out a way to justify to myself, hey, you know, I can make it work, can make some compromises here. I want to take care of my family. I want to do this. And, but he didn't. And to me, even though everybody thinks that he's crazy for doing that, he did something that's always been my mantra, which is, for an artist, pretend you have all the money in the world and pretend that you have the health of yourself and your family. What decision would you make here? And he made that decision based on that.
Yeah.
And for that, you know, for me, that makes me have so much respect for him, because I couldn't do that. I don't think I could do that.
That is, it does show extraordinary integrity, but then how big would his bank account have been? I don't know what percentage that would even mean to him at that time, $50 million. It depends. If he has hundreds of millions already, then it's not that big a deal. But if he has a few million, 50 million's huge. I don't know the range of his finances at that time.
Well, when you die, what do you do with the money?
You give it to an animal rescue.
Okay. So you can't
can't take it with you.
You very rarely see a U-Haul behind a hearse.
I mean, you would know this. At the time that happened, would 50 million have been a significant amount to him?
Yes, very significant.
Okay. So then he deserves even more respect then. I mean, I just had no idea how much money would he have. I don't know. He was already very successful. And I've heard, you know, you hear these tales, these Hollywood urban legends of people who had $1 million development deals by the time they were 21. They never went to air, but they had so many pilot development deals.
I've probably been a part of 100 of those.
Right.
You know, it's crazy. You know, there's the people that had deals. Like, I remember John DiResta had the biggest deal in the history of television, based on a one-person show he did.
Remember this. Yeah.
About a cop, and he was a cop.
Right. I just worked with him recently.
Yeah, and he got, like, I think $650,000 back 20 years ago. And again, another lesson. How did he get the deal? He did a one-person show. He created his own thing.
Yeah.
And that helped him get it. Unfortunately, it didn't last.
Yeah.
But he's a fascinating guy.
He's lovely. I mean, I just worked with him in a comedy show literally just before I went to the UK. In fact, I believe you have one of his tables that he made.
I do. He made me my dining room table.
This thus supporting the other jobs that comedians have to do to pay.
Probably was paying back one of the commissions, I think, maybe.
Yeah, no, he was lovely, but he told me the tale of, you know, how brutal it was and how brutal it was on his family as well. And, you know, that tale that you hear so many times where you've got the show and then the network interferes and ruins it, you know, and that was sort of his take on it, was they were stripping it of all the things that had been in his one-man show that had caught the eye of the industry in the first place, and those were stripped away from the TV show.
Yeah, it all has to come together, and it has to be magical, you know.
So what's next for Uber manager Barry Katz?
The end of this interview? The end of this 4-hour interview?
Well, you're the one who can tell a wonderful tale.
All the people will fire me after being away for 4 hours here.
I'll hire you for my podcast when I've got 13 million listeners like Jay Moore.
I'll be the one to probably ask you for money.
You'll take me over the top in my podcast. You'll take me to that next level.
Well, I think you'll take me to the level. I mean, Jay's thing, I mean, I think his things have been crazy. I mean, it's like because of him, I think probably I've had over 1 million people listen to.
Wow.
So I'm very grateful to him. But, you know, again, if there's anything to take from this interview, if you're a comic or an actor or an actress, it's just, you can't fail if you're better than everybody else by miles. You can't fail. You know, Beth Bears in Two Broke Girls. I think she went on 100 auditions without booking anything. And they kept bringing her back. I remember because I was, you know, Whitney would tell me. And because she created that show with Michael Patrick King. And each time she'd come back, they'd be like, oh, that was amazing. But obviously we're not going to hire somebody who hasn't done anything before. And then she kept coming back. Then she tested. And then, you know, even though everybody had more experience, she was undeniable. They had to hire her. And they did. You know, on the Whitney show, there's this young guy, Tone Bell, who got hired this year. Hadn't done anything. All these actors auditioning against him, testing against him. They hundreds of episodes of experience.
Right.
How did he get it?
Right.
He got it because he was 10 times better than everybody else.
Yeah, well, that is very encouraging. It's the saying, I like to use it, the cream rises to the top.
It always does in some way. It's got to. Unless you're drinking, you're doing drugs,
right.
You're chasing girls or guys, you're you're self-sabotage.
Right. I have another expression I've told a lot of my friends. One of my own personal mantras, don't get eliminated.
Yeah, it's like, don't get eliminated. That's great. That's great. I always like to say, create a car accident. Because everybody slows down to look at the car accident. Okay. And create a problem. Create a fucking problem for any casting director, any network, any studio. Create a fucking problem.
You mean by being so good?
Be so good that they're like fucked up and they go like, oh my God, what am I going to do here? Create a fucking problem.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's it. And, you know, one of the things I want to say before we end this thing.
Oh, we're only halfway through.
Good,
sorry.
Fantastic.
I arranged with your secretary. This is 5 hours.
I wish there was a porta potty right on this couch where you can just go to the bathroom and you just...
Is that, you need to go to the
restroom. Like on a plane. I think I just need a diaper at this point.
I can bring in a commode. I've been fantastic. Volunteering at a hospital. I have access to them.
That's fantastic. But I'm honored that you had me on. I can't believe I'm like your third or so person here, and I hope that something that I said here can maybe help somebody or inspire somebody. Absolutely. I think you've got a good code and a good set of mantras yourself that you live by, and I'm truly grateful that you took time out. So join us for the second half of this interview. Oh, no. Thank you very much. I'd hug you, but I'm sick. You're very sick. So I don't want to get you sick. So I'm even more grateful that you and your germs took part. All right, well, so thank you very much. Give me one of these. Thank you, Barry Katz. All right. Thank you so much. Okay. Awesome. That's a wrap. Thank you.